Hi, I'm Alex from Alex and Olmsted, and today I'm going to be showing you how to make shadow puppets using the Cricut Maker. If you're not familiar with Cricut Maker or the Cricut Explore family series, they're die-cutting machines that are computer controlled. So it's basically like having a robot with an X-Acto knife cutting out your designs. It's super useful if you're cutting out repetitive things or highly detailed things, and we recently used them in several shadow puppet projects. One of the big benefits of designing on the computer and having the Cricut cut things out is it lets you prototype shadow puppets really quickly and make small adjustments that you don't feel like you're going crazy cutting things over and over and over again. So once you have your design and say it's for a commission and they want it 10% bigger, you already have the file, you can scale it up and just zip it straight out. For this example, I thought it would be useful to design a shadow puppet dog that's running sideways. This will be a 3-part shadow puppet, and when you're designing your shadow puppets, you need to think about what it is. In this case, it's a dog from the side, and what it needs to do. In this case, all it needs to do is run. So we're going to build that super simply by having a body and 2 leg pieces. Let's go into computer world and see the design process. Let's head on over to the computer and I'll show you the design process on that side. The first step of designing this dog shadow puppet is going to be finding a suitable image to base it off of. You could take a picture yourself if you have a specific dog or pose that you're working off of, or if you've already done a sketch and want to turn that into a shadow puppet, your work is already done for you. If you want some reference images or you're working on a deadline, you can always check Google Images. When I'm looking at these images, I'm looking for a few different things. One is a nice neutral background that's going to be easy to remove later. And the other thing is a good sort of separation of legs. The legs aren't overlapping each other. I don't like that that leg is bent, but you could always duplicate the front one. But I think, let's see more. This one looks pretty good. Even though it has some watermarks, we should be able to crop it out. So I'm going to go ahead and copy that image and bring it up in Photoshop to remove the background. If you don't have Photoshop, there are plenty of other free alternatives. I'm going to use the quick selection brush tool to sort of grab all of the dog elements. And if it's not just the way you like it, you can always go in with the lasso tool and clean things up. I'm going to start a new layer and fill that with the foreground color, which for me is black right now. While that's still selected, I'm going to hit Control-C on my keyboard to copy it, and now open up Adobe Illustrator and paste. Now when it pastes this image, it's not really usable for us because the Cricut machines work based on paths. This is just a pixel image, and what we really want is a vector file. So for instance, this rectangle is a vector drawing of a rectangle. You can take it and change its size and shape, and it'll always stay as a vector file, and it won't get pixely or anything. So what we need to do is turn this drawing of a dog into a vector file. And we can do that easily by going up to Image Trace. I like to use the drop-down menu and select Black and White Logo. Now it's already traced. It does a really clean job because we started with a black and white image. You can bring in photographs and have it scan it in different ways and layers, but I find this way to be super easy. Now that this is a vector image, it's also vectorized the white border around it, and it's just one unit. So what we need to do is select it and hit expand, and that'll separate it into a black layer and a white layer. And right now they're still grouped together, so we'll just hit ungroup, select the white layer, and hit delete on our keyboard to get rid of it. If you had any floating bits inside, say some negative space white imagery, a cleaner way to do that would be to select the white portion of your image, go up to Select, Same, Fill Color, and that will select all of the white, even little bits that you can't see. Then hit Delete, and we have a nice clean copy of our black layer. I'm going to hold down Alt and drag the dog over here to make a copy. So I have my clean master copy here, and I can work on this one to the right. This is going to be a 3-part shadow puppet, so I'll go ahead and drag down 2 more copies. And we'll create the top layer as just the body. So I'm going to use my eraser tool and imagine if the back legs were removed, how the rest of the shape of the body would look. So it's going to follow that curve a little bit and sort of go up and meet the tail. That separates it into 2 separate bodies. So I can delete the lower half and then zoom in and clean up using the pencil tool. You can also use the smooth tool to simplify your number of points. We're going to get rid of the front legs now in the same way by selecting the object, selecting our eraser, zooming in, and just following how that body might continue. Select the legs, delete, and now we have a nice clean body layer. I'm just going to go do a quick once-over looking to see if any of those points need to be touched up or smoothed out. Everything looks pretty good. I'm going to smooth out just the tip of that tail. Just because I don't like sharp bits on my shadow puppets. I'm going to turn this dog red just so we can see the contrast. And I'm going to place the second right over the first, and then use Control in my brackets to move it down a layer so I can see how they intersect. That's looking pretty good. I'm going to bring it back up to the top layer. And now I want this layer just to be the back legs and the hips. They'll need to overlap because that's how shadow puppets work. So I'm going to continue these up and over like that. Delete those pieces. And that looks pretty clean. We'll check our points on the feet. These legs are a little funky because they're coming in at such a low angle, but I think if we imagine where the shoulder blades would be on the dog, it's probably rotating from somewhere around here. So if we just make sure we have enough space to work with, we can clean that up after we do our first test cut of it. Again, just cleaning up these little paths. That looks like a pretty good separation. I'm going to do a little test real quick. I'm making these little registration hatches so I know where exactly the legs are supposed to line up with the body. I'm just estimating right now where that pivot point might be on the dog. That looks pretty good, and I'm going to test it using the rotation tool. So I'll select my object, come up here and hit rotate, and if you click on this intersection between there to set your anchor point, then you can rotate it in space and sort of see how that looks. So it all looks like it's not breaking the physics of the dog or the anatomy of the dog. So I think that's pretty good. I'm going to take this one, copy and bring it over here, and we'll say that this dog rotates from about there. We'll do the same thing testing it with the rotate tool. And that looks pretty good as well. I'm going to take and hold Shift and select both of these registration points, hit Control C to copy them, and then Control F to paste them in place. So even though it doesn't look any different now, there are actually 4 cross marks. So I'm going to select the back legs, hold Shift, and select another one of the cross marks, and move them out of the way, and we can see exactly where those cross marks line up. I'll do the same thing for the front legs, moving them out of the way. That looks pretty good. I'm going to group these together by hitting Control G. Control G. And we'll just bring those back over. I'm going to select all of my doggo pieces, hit Control C, start a new file, Control V to paste them into place, and I'm going to reassemble my dog. And now is when we can figure out scale. So I'll hold down and select everything. And if I go up to transform, it'll give me the measurements of exactly how big everything is together. The width is measuring from this very tip of the tail to tip of the nose, or rather end of the tail, leftmost part of the tail to tip of the nose, and the height is from the lowest point on the foot to the tip of the tail. Let's say for this test, let's say we want this dog to be 140 millimeters wide. So making sure that this constrain width and height proportions is selected, we'll change our total width to 140 millimeters, and everything scales together. I'm going to separate my pieces now so that they're not overlapping. And that looks good. We'll go up to File, Save As, and we'll save this as an SVG file. We'll call this dog running test. We'll save it with everything just the way it is. And now we can bring up Cricut Design Space. From your home screen here, you can see where you can choose a bunch of different projects to work on. But all we're going to worry about is making sure that in our tool selection, we've selected Cricut Maker. If you're using a Cricut Explorer, you'll want to choose that one. And we'll hit New Project. We're here in Design Space. So to bring our SVG file in, we'll go over to the left toolbar here, click Upload, Upload Image, Browse, and find our saved SVG file, Dog Running Test. We can make sure that it's the one we want here before uploading it, and when we're happy with that, click Save. Now we can see our recently uploaded images down here, so we can select our dog running test and click Insert Images. And now it's brought it into the design space for us. We can double check the scale or change the scale if we like. Everything looks pretty good. One important thing that I want to do is make sure to select by holding Shift and clicking all of the crosses, and right now everything is set to cut. So with those crosses selected, I want to go up here to Line Type and select Draw. That'll change the tool that Cricut uses to draw those X's instead of cut them out. Everything else will be cut. Everything looks good. But if I hit Make It right now, it's going to separate my draw images and my cut pieces onto two separate mats. You can see that here. On mat 1, it has the 4 crosses all lined up, and on mat 2, all the dog pieces lined up. So we'll hit Cancel, go back, and with everything selected in a group, we're going to click on Attach. That'll attach all the X's exactly where they are in relation to those dog pieces. Now when we click on Make It, everything's nice and dandy. We can see where it's going to cut exactly on the mat, so we know we want to load up a piece of material that's roughly 7 inches wide by 5 inches high. I'll go ahead and load that up on my mat now. And we'll peel off the protective covering of the mat and stick it down like that. Okay, now that my material is loaded on the mat, I'm going to click Continue. The design space is going to make sure that my Cricut Maker is connected, and then I'm going to have to set the material. The Cricut Maker can accept all sorts of materials, and when you select the material, it'll change either the blade that you're cutting with, the speed you're cutting with, and also the pressure that it cuts with. I've already marked these as my favorites because I use them often, but if you need to go up to Browse All Materials and type in, for instance, poster board, you can find what style poster board you want. If you want to cut chipboard, they have different settings for that. But for today, I'm just going to pick light cardstock. It's going to prompt me to load a black pen in clamp A and a fine point blade in clamp B. So we'll do that now. Now that that's loaded up, I'll load my mat there and hit load. Now all I have to do is press the blinking Cricut button. Now we can hit unload from the mat. It'll spit it out. We can peel off the extra, and we're left with our dog puppet. From there I can hit finish, and I still have my file here. If I wanted to resize this, I could resize it either by opening up my Illustrator file again and editing the file directly here, or if I wanted to change the size from inside Cricut Design Space, I could just do that. And now we can test our pieces with thumbtacks. And that's pretty good. Now that I have my finished shadow puppet design, all I need to do is add rods to it, whether I want those to be perpendicular to the shadow puppet or underneath. This manila envelope material isn't great for shadow puppets because it's a little transparent, so I'd probably cut the actual shadow puppet out of either thin black plastic or black poster board. I really like working With these manila envelopes though, because you can buy them for super cheap, they're great cardstock material and they cut really easily on the Cricut Maker. I wanted to end with a few final thoughts on cutting things by hand versus using a machine like the Cricut Maker. I know there are a lot of people who will say that they really love cutting by hand. It's a nice sort of meditative process to sit and cut out each individual bit by hand, and they really want that handmade look. And that's fine. If you don't want to use the machine, you don't have to. The really great benefit of this machine is not having to sit and do everything by hand. If you're a working artist, you're probably not getting paid a lot to make these things. So you want to be as efficient as you can when you're doing these tedious tasks. One thing to consider is cost. The Cricut Maker runs at about $400 US. I got mine on sale for $350 during the holiday season. There's often a sale going on, but expect to pay around $350 to $400. That includes the machine, a cutting mat, the precision cutter, and a couple other little tools. By comparison, an X-Acto knife with a couple blades is around $7 to $10. But you have to consider, if you're sitting at the table all night cutting with an X-Acto knife, that's a lot of eye strain, it's a lot of carpal tunnel hand strain, and it means if you need to make a second copy of it, you're starting over from scratch cutting it out. When considering whether the cost of the machine is worth it, try and ask yourself, if you had to hire an assistant to help you cut out all those little pieces, how much would you probably pay them an hour? And if the machine is going to last you a certain number of years and a certain number of projects, how many times would you need to hire somebody to help you with that work? Another thing to consider, though, is how often are you realistically going to use it? If you don't do shadow puppets that often, and it's just the appeal of an interesting new craft toy, maybe see if you have a friend that has one that you can use every now and then, or check if a local makerspace already has one that you can try out. So whether or not you decide to use a Cricut Maker in your own shadow puppetry is up to you, but I hope this helps you on your way. I'd also like to take a quick moment to thank our patrons over at patreon.com, whose monthly support helps us continue to make new work like this possible. Their names are here. If you would like to join them in their support, we would really appreciate it. Just head on over to patreon.com/Alex and Olmsted.